There is a gentle sense of warmth surrounding you at this moment, even if you have not fully tuned into it yet. It feels like a subtle current of energy flowing around your presence, calm yet steady, carrying something close to quiet admiration and a deeper emotional pull. It is not loud or dramatic, but it is there, weaving through the space around you in a way that feels almost unspoken. You might have dismissed it as imagination or a random coincidence, or even convinced yourself that you are reading too much into nothing. But what you have been sensing is not random at all. It is real, and it is already connected to you in ways you are only beginning to notice. What you are feeling is not something your mind has created out of wishful thinking. It is not a false signal or emotional confusion. There is genuine truth behind it, even if it feels subtle or difficult to explain. Someone younger than you has developed emotions that go far beyond simple curiosity or passing attraction. These feelings are not temporary or surface level. They have taken root deeply within them. You are present in their thoughts in a consistent way, showing up in their mornings and lingering into their nights. Even during ordinary moments of their day, your presence remains in their mind like something they cannot quite put into words, yet cannot ignore either. This may feel unexpected, and a part of you might question whether this could truly be about you. You may find yourself wondering what someone younger could possibly see or feel that strongly. At times, you might even reflect on your own life and assume that certain parts of your story are already behind you, or that your presence may not carry the same light it once did. But these thoughts are shaped by past experiences and emotional wounds, not by the truth of who you are now. They are internal stories formed through disappointment, not reflections of your actual value or impact. There is a deeper awareness that has been holding space for you through everything you have been through. A higher presence has witnessed your journey, including the moments you questioned your worth and the nights you felt unseen or uncertain about love and connection. Those fears have felt very real to you, but they do not define your reality. You are far more impactful than you realize. Your energy shifts the atmosphere around you in ways that others can feel even when you are not aware of it yourself. Because you experience your own presence every day, it becomes harder for you to notice how strongly it affects others. People around you often sense qualities in you that you may overlook. They notice the way you carry your experiences, the depth behind your expressions, and the calm strength you have built through challenges. There is something about your presence that makes others feel acknowledged and understood, even in silence. This younger person is especially sensitive to that energy. They are drawn to you in a way they cannot fully explain. When they are near you, they feel a shift inside themselves, a mixture of comfort, clarity, and emotional aliveness that feels unfamiliar but meaningful. Over time, these emotions have not stayed still within them. They have grown and deepened, becoming something they can no longer easily push aside. You may have already seen small indications of this connection without realizing their meaning. Perhaps they look at you a little longer than necessary, or their tone softens when they speak with you. Maybe they create small opportunities to be closer, offer help without being asked, or remember details about you that seemed insignificant at the time. These are not random behaviors. They are quiet expressions of an inner attachment that has already formed. There is a reason this connection exists beyond surface-level attraction. It is not a coincidence that this person has entered your life in this way or feels drawn to you so strongly. Some connections carry timing and purpose that unfold gradually rather than all at once. Nothing meaningful is placed in your path without intention. Every encounter holds something to reveal, even if its meaning is not immediately clear. This younger presence is part of that unfolding process, and the significance of this bond will continue to become clearer with time. You came across this message for a reason that is connected to your own inner awareness. Something within you responded to these words before your mind had time to analyze them. That feeling of recognition is not something to dismiss lightly. It is your intuition acknowledging that this message aligns with something currently unfolding in your life. Even if everything is not fully clear yet, the part of you that understands energy and emotion has already registered its meaning. When they are near you, something inside them softens. The world outside feels heavy, fast, and overwhelming, filled with pressure and constant noise. But somehow, in your presence, that noise seems to quiet down. It is not that their problems disappear, but they stop feeling as chaotic. You bring a sense of calm that feels grounding to them, like a pause they did not know they needed. Over time, you learned how to stay composed, how to respond instead of react, and how to carry yourself with balance. That steady energy does not go unnoticed. This younger person feels it deeply, especially if they are currently going through confusion, stress, or emotional uncertainty. To them, you feel like something stable in a world that often feels unpredictable, and that sense of safety becomes a quiet but powerful attraction. You also make them feel seen in a way they are not used to. When they are around you, there is a feeling of being acknowledged, heard, and valued. You may think your actions are simple, listening properly, asking questions, showing interest, but for someone who has often felt overlooked, these small things carry real emotional weight. They start to feel more confident in your presence, more capable, and more open. The fact that there is an age difference between you is not what defines the connection in their mind. In their experience, it creates a different kind of balance, where perspective, maturity, and emotional energy meet in a way that feels unusual but meaningful. Different life stages can sometimes bring a contrast that highlights strengths in both people rather than separating them. It is easy to get caught up in what society says about connections like this, but real emotional bonds do not always follow those expectations. Attraction and connection are not shaped only by rules or external opinions. They often grow from understanding, resonance, and the way two people naturally respond to each other's presence. What matters most is not labels or assumptions, but whether there is genuine emotional alignment and mutual recognition. From this perspective, the bond feels like something unfolding rather than something forced, and it may bring you into a phase of life where new emotional experiences become possible again. There is something about you as a whole person that leaves an impression on them that they cannot easily explain. It is not just appearance or surface-level traits, but the full combination of who you are, your voice, your expressions, the way you carry your experiences, and the calm way you handle challenges. Even your quiet moments, the way you think before speaking, or the warmth in your interactions, all contribute to how strongly they feel drawn in. They may try to rationalize it, but feelings like this do not stay contained in logic for long. The more they try to step back mentally, the more their thoughts return to you, because emotional connection tends to grow stronger with familiarity and presence rather than fade. This connection feels meaningful to them because it is not based only on physical attraction, but on something deeper in how they experience you as a person. They are drawn to your mind, your perspective, and the way you express yourself, as much as anything else. In their inner world, this creates a sense of curiosity and emotional attachment that continues to build over time. For you, it may feel like life is offering a new emotional chapter, one that arrives after a period where you might have believed certain experiences were already behind you. But emotionally significant connections often appear when they are least expected, and they tend to challenge old assumptions about timing and possibility. At the same time, this kind of situation does not require rushing or forcing meaning. It asks for awareness, emotional clarity, and grounded boundaries. You can remain open without losing balance, and you can observe what unfolds without needing to decide everything immediately. If this younger person is holding back in any way, it may be because they sense uncertainty or hesitation and are trying to interpret it. Subtle emotional signals matter a lot in connections like this, and people often respond more to energy and openness than to words alone. When clarity increases, hesitation usually decreases. What makes this connection feel intense is the way both of you bring different emotional qualities into the dynamic. You offer stability, experience, and depth. They bring freshness, curiosity, and emotional immediacy. When these energies meet, there can be a sense of contrast that feels both grounding and energizing at the same time. Whether or not this develops further, it is still a reflection of how human connection works when two people resonate on a deeper level. What is important to hold on to is your own sense of worth and emotional steadiness. Experiences like this can feel meaningful, but they should never pull you away from your own judgment or inner balance. Real connection does not require pressure or urgency. It becomes clearer with time, consistency, and mutual understanding, not assumptions or intensity alone. They have noticed details others tend to miss, and they remember small things about you, which shows a deeper level of attention. This is not something shallow or temporary, but the beginning of feelings that are slowly growing into something more meaningful. Try not to pull back out of fear or overanalyze every interaction. Allow things to unfold naturally and let conversation move without pressure, because genuine connection needs space to breathe in order to grow. When tension is removed, understanding becomes easier and more natural. Your feelings are not random. They carry insight and deserve to be acknowledged rather than dismissed. What is developing here asks for presence, not resistance, and a willingness to simply stay open to what is forming between you. All things tend to work together in ways that eventually support your growth, even when the path is not immediately clear. This unexpected connection with a younger person may feel surprising, but it is unfolding within a larger pattern that you do not yet fully see. It is as if a door you assumed was closed has quietly opened again, offering a new possibility for emotional experience. You are not less valuable with time. In many ways, you have become more layered, more grounded, and more interesting because of everything you have lived through. The other person is drawn to qualities in you that you may overlook in yourself, including your strength, depth, and calm presence. What you see as ordinary, they experience as meaningful and rare, and through their eyes, you are invited to see yourself with more compassion. This person is genuinely curious about your life beyond surface-level details. They want to understand your story, your experiences, and the moments that shaped you into who you are. To them, your past is not a burden, but something that adds meaning and depth to your presence. Being truly listened to can bring a sense of healing, and this connection may create space for emotional honesty and openness. Imagine being accepted without needing to hide or perform, simply seen as your full self. At the same time, it is important to stay grounded in your values and boundaries, especially when there is an age difference involved. Mutual respect and clarity are essential, and both people are responsible for their choices. If this connection feels right, you can acknowledge it, and if not, you are also free to step back. What matters most is sincerity, self-awareness, and emotional truth. What you're really circling around here is the psychology of perceived connection mixed with emotional projection, attention sensitivity, and the way the mind tries to assign meaning to subtle social cues. When someone remembers small details about you, your brain naturally tags it as special significance. That's normal human wiring. We are built to interpret attention as value. If someone listens closely, notices patterns, or brings up something you mentioned before, it activates a feeling of importance and emotional safety. But that doesn't automatically mean romantic love is forming. It can be admiration, curiosity, respect, personality compatibility, or simply a socially attentive personality. Some people are just observant by nature, especially those who are empathetic or socially aware. Where things get complicated is when emotional interpretation fills in the gaps. The mind doesn't like uncertainty, so it tries to complete the story. If they notice me this much, it must mean something deeper. That's where attraction narratives can form very quickly, especially when there is emotional vulnerability or a desire for connection involved. The same small behaviors can feel amplified because they are being emotionally read into rather than just observed. Age difference adds another psychological layer. When there is a perceived imbalance in life stage, people can unconsciously assign symbolic meaning to the connection, like guidance, stability, growth, or renewal. These meanings can feel powerful, but they are interpretations, not proof of romantic intention. In real human behavior, younger people may be drawn to maturity because it feels grounding, not necessarily because it is romantic. Similarly, older individuals may feel validated by attention because it feels affirming or revitalizing. These are emotional responses, not conclusions. Another important dynamic is how easily admiration can be mistaken for emotional exclusivity. Someone can genuinely appreciate you, feel safe around you, or enjoy your presence without it evolving into deeper attachment. Human connection exists on a wide spectrum, and not everything intense or meaningful is romantic in direction. Sometimes the emotional charge is coming from contrast rather than intimacy, meaning the difference in personalities or energy creates feeling rather than shared emotional depth. There's also something called attentional bias, where once you suspect someone might like you, your mind begins tracking every micro-action, tone changes, eye contact, proximity, timing, response speed. These details start to feel like signals, but they are often just normal behavior that becomes emotionally highlighted because your awareness has shifted. Healthy grounding comes from separating what is observed from what is interpreted. Observed. They remember details, they talk to you, they show interest. Interpretation. They are developing deep romantic love. One is factual behavior, the other is meaning assigned to it. The gap between those two is where confusion usually grows. None of this means dismissing your feelings. It just means understanding where they come from. Emotional awareness is strongest when it can hold two truths at once. This feels meaningful to me, and I do not yet have enough evidence to define what it is. That balance prevents both over-idealization and unnecessary self-doubt. If there is a real connection forming, it will not rely on interpreting signs or guessing intentions. It will become clearer through consistent, mutual, openly expressed behavior over time. And if it is not, clarity will also naturally settle in without forcing meaning onto ambiguous moments. What stays most important is that your sense of worth does not depend on decoding someone else's behavior. Attention can feel powerful, but it is not the same thing as commitment, clarity, or emotional responsibility. When you look deeper at why these kinds of situations feel so emotionally intense, it often comes down to unmet emotional needs, meeting ambiguous signals. The mind naturally tries to complete unfinished emotional patterns, especially if there has been a period of loneliness, emotional fatigue, or feeling unseen. In that state, even small moments of attention from someone can feel amplified because they stand out against a background of emotional scarcity. It is not that the feelings are fake, but that their intensity is often shaped more by internal conditions than by the actual depth of the external connection. Another layer here is how the brain responds to uncertainty. Uncertainty creates dopamine activity, which is the same system involved in anticipation and reward. So when someone's behavior is not fully clear, sometimes warm, sometimes neutral, the mind becomes more focused, not less. It starts replaying interactions, analyzing tone, and searching for patterns. This can create a loop where ambiguity feels emotionally engaging, even when nothing concrete is actually developing. That's why mixed signals or subtle attention can sometimes feel more powerful than clear, direct communication. There is also the human tendency toward narrative building. Once a story begins forming in your mind, it becomes emotionally self-reinforcing. Each small detail gets added to the narrative as evidence, even if the same behavior would feel neutral in a different context. For example, remembering a detail might feel like emotional depth in one situation, but in another context it could simply be good memory or social attentiveness. The story you build around the behavior becomes more emotionally influential than the behavior itself. In relationships where there is an age difference or perceived imbalance, projection can become even stronger. One person may represent stability, maturity, or emotional grounding, while the other represents freshness, validation, or emotional activation. These symbolic roles can feel meaningful because they activate psychological contrast. But contrast alone does not necessarily indicate compatibility or romantic direction. It only explains why the emotional response feels strong. What helps bring clarity is slowing down interpretation and focusing on consistency over moments. Real emotional interest, when it exists in a grounded way, tends to show stability rather than fluctuation. It becomes clearer through direct communication, clear intention, and repeated behavior that aligns over time. Without that consistency, the mind is often filling in gaps with hope, fear, or imagination, depending on emotional state. A useful internal check is to separate what happened from what I felt it meant. What happened stays factual and simple. What it meant is where interpretation begins. The more emotionally charged the situation feels, the more important it becomes to keep those two layers distinct. This reduces confusion and helps prevent over-attachment to possibilities rather than realities. At the same time, it is important not to dismiss your emotional experience entirely. Feelings are signals, but they are not conclusions. They can point towards something worth exploring, such as a need for connection, recognition, or emotional intimacy, without necessarily confirming a specific romantic outcome with a specific person. That distinction keeps emotional awareness grounded instead of speculative. If anything real is developing, it will become clearer through openness and directness rather than signs and interpretation. And if it is not, clarity will eventually emerge on its own, as emotional distance naturally corrects the narrative the mind has built. Another important layer in all of this is how easily emotional meaning can be created from very ordinary human behavior when someone becomes psychologically significant in your mind. Once a person occupies mental space because of attraction, curiosity, or emotional openness, the brain begins to treat them as high relevance, and that changes how every interaction is processed. A simple glance feels more loaded, a short conversation feels more personal, and neutral behavior can start to feel intentional. The person hasn't necessarily changed, but your perception of them has. This is where emotional amplification happens. The nervous system doesn't just register events, it assigns weight to them. When someone feels important to you internally, your mind increases the emotional volume of anything connected to them. That's why small gestures like remembering something you said or being slightly attentive can feel like deep emotional signals. In reality, those behaviors exist on a wide spectrum and are not exclusive indicators of romantic intent. They can be signs of personality, empathy, or simple social awareness. Another factor is the brain's preference for coherence. When you start sensing a story, your mind tries to make all data points fit that story, even if some of them don't truly belong there. This is called pattern completion. It reduces emotional uncertainty, but it can also distort interpretation. So instead of seeing individual moments separately, the mind connects them into a single narrative. This must mean something is developing. The more emotionally charged the situation feels, the stronger this pattern building becomes. There's also an emotional feedback loop involved. The more you think about a person, the more emotionally significant they become. And the more significant they become, the more attention your brain gives them. This loop can create a sense of deepening connection, even without real-world progression. It's not imagination in a dismissive sense. It's normal cognitive reinforcement, but it needs grounding in external reality to stay accurate. When age difference enters the picture, interpretation can become even more emotionally symbolic. The older person may unconsciously represent safety, maturity, or emotional stability, while the younger person may represent vitality, attention, or emotional openness. These symbolic meanings can feel like chemistry, but they are often psychological projections rather than confirmed relational dynamics. Understanding this helps separate emotional symbolism from actual mutual intention. The most stabilizing perspective is recognizing that real connection is not built from intensity of feeling alone. Intensity can come from ambiguity, projection, or unmet emotional needs. Real connection becomes visible through clarity, mutual expression, and consistent behavior that continues even when emotional excitement settles. If something is real, it doesn't rely on interpretation to be understood. It becomes easier to read over time, not harder. So the key shift is moving from "what does this mean" to what is actually being shown repeatedly and clearly. That question reduces emotional distortion and brings the situation back into observable reality rather than internal narrative building. At a deeper psychological level, what often keeps these kinds of thoughts emotionally active is not the other person's behavior itself, but the mind's attachment to possibility. Possibility is powerful because it sits in an unfinished space. It hasn't been confirmed or denied, so it stays open, and open loops naturally attract attention. The brain treats unfinished emotional situations as something that still needs resolution, which is why you may find yourself revisiting interactions or replaying moments, even when nothing new is actually happening. This is also why subtle attention can feel disproportionately meaningful. When someone's behavior is slightly warmer than neutral, the mind doesn't just register it as a single event. It compares it to expectation, then assigns emotional contrast. That contrast is what creates the feeling of significance. Without contrast, the same behavior might not stand out at all. So what feels like signs is often the emotional difference between expectation and experience, not necessarily evidence of deeper intent. Another important mechanism is emotional idealization during ambiguity. When someone is not fully known in a direct, consistent, and grounded way, the mind has space to fill in the gaps. It tends to fill those gaps with the most emotionally satisfying interpretation available, especially if there is desire for connection involved. This is not intentional self-deception. It is simply how imagination works when information is incomplete. The less clarity there is, the more creative the mind becomes in constructing meaning. At the same time, human beings are naturally wired to seek relational patterns. We are social interpreters by default, constantly reading tone, timing, facial expressions, and energy shifts. In emotionally charged situations, this system becomes heightened. You start noticing micro details that you would normally ignore, and those details begin to feel like communication in themselves. But not every micro behavior carries relational meaning. Many are just neutral variations in human behavior. There is also an emotional regulation aspect to consider. When life feels uncertain or emotionally flat, the mind often gravitates towards situations that generate emotional stimulation, even if that stimulation comes from ambiguity. Uncertainty produces engagement, and engagement can sometimes be mistaken for connection. This is why situations that are unclear can feel more emotionally consuming than situations that are stable and defined. What brings clarity is not deeper analysis of the same signals, but stepping back and observing whether anything is actually progressing in a concrete way. Real relational development shows up as mutual clarity, directness and consistency that increases over time, not just emotional intensity or interpretive signals. Without that progression, the experience remains internally driven rather than externally confirmed. A helpful shift is moving from emotional reading to behavioral tracking. Emotional reading asks, what does this feel like it means? Behavioral tracking asks, what is consistently happening without interpretation? That separation reduces confusion and helps prevent the mind from turning uncertainty into certainty too early. Ultimately, the mind is always trying to create meaning, but meaning becomes most reliable when it is anchored in repeated observable reality rather than isolated moments.